in this comprehension passage, he's talking about antiques, relics, objects you see that belong to one country, and perhaps other countries you see, or some other country you see, seizes that object and keeps it in its position. The laws you see guiding those objects, the patrimony laws. He's talking in general about these things. Now, in the first paragraph, he gives you an example, an incident, a masterpiece Greek urn that had been a museum dross in 1972 and 2007. And US agreed to return 40 objects to Italy. Obviously, US had acquired that. And again, the auction house Sotheby, and you see they agreed to return certain things to Cambodia. Now, what he's talking about here is he's talking about the patrimony laws, the cultural property or patrimony laws. And these laws, you see, they restrict the transfer of property from one country to the other country, particularly the source country. It restricts, you see, that the source country, you see, does not transfer. You see, its legacy, its property, you see, to some other country. So there is a ban on the export of cultural property, you see. And then in the third paragraph, he's talking about maybe through colonialism or by some other means, you see, some countries, you see, looted other countries, their artifacts and other things. Like we have an example of the famous Kohinoor, you see, being looted by the British and not returning it. So the point is, I mean, if you invite other countries to your country, even for archaeological purposes, there is always a drawback. They might walk away with what you call your precious antiques or relics without your knowledge. And when colonialism was in force, when colonialism was prevailing, they didn't have to ask anyone. They would just, what you possibly confiscate these things from the source countries and possess themselves. Now, the writer, you see, he talks about his own survey, you see, in the fourth paragraph. He's talking about his own survey of different countries and other things. And the point he says that once you invite other countries for archaeological purposes or archaeological excavations to the source country, to your own country, there might be problems, you see, arising there. So in the next paragraph, he talks about, fifth paragraph, he talks about the strict cultural patrimony laws. They are popular in most countries. They are popular. But the problem is, if you impose strict patrimony laws, there might be a problem that archaeological surveys may not be very popular then. Or you may not have scientists and historians and archaeologists coming from other countries to study your country. Now, that is also a drawback. He points out here, but the downside may be that they reduce incentives for foreign governments, non-governmental organizations, and educational institutions to invest in overseas exploration, because their efforts will not necessarily be rewarded by opportunities to hold, display, and study what is uncovered. Because the source country may not agree to part with what has been uncovered, what has been dug out, excavated. The source country may not agree to that. So that is a thing there. It might give a boost to tourism, no doubt. People may come and see it, but then it might not, you see, possibly invite foreign investments or foreign governments or educational institutions to come forth. So, but that doesn't mean, you see, that strict cultural patrimony laws, you see, are imposed in such a way that you don't allow other countries to enter your country. So then he gives you an example of China. You see that the Chinese government, you see, it somehow relaxed its property laws, and then it allowed, you see, other countries to come over and study these things. So the entire passage is about basically, you see, the operation of the patrimony law and the use of our artifacts or relics or antiques, you see, that have been discovered in the source country, for that matter, in any country, you see. So this is about the whole thing. Now let us look at the questions here. The first question, From the passage, we can infer that the author is likely to advise poor but archaeologically rich source countries to do all of the following except. Yes, what would he advise? Number one, adopt Chinese strategy of dropping its cultural property laws and carrying out archaeological research through international collaboration. Yes, he could do that. Yeah, I mean, those countries which are poor, but if they are archaeologically rich, they must allow allow other countries to come forward and work there. To find ways to motivate other countries to finance archaeological explorations in their country, allow foreign countries to analyze and exhibit the archaeological tools, finds made in the source country, fund institutes in other countries to undertake archaeological exploration in the source country, reaping the benefits of cutting edge techniques. He wouldn't recommend this. The last one, except, that is the answer. Number four is the option. He would advise poor but archaeological rich source countries to do all of the following, all one, two, three, but not four. What does four involve? That is funding institutes in other countries to undertake archaeological exploration in the source country. That is, you are paying, you see, the other countries, you are paying the other countries to carry out archaeological surveys in your country, reaping the benefits of cutting edge techniques. No, he wouldn't allow that. Now let's come to the next one. Which one of the following statements, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? The central idea of the passage, let's see that. For instance, let's start with number one. UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. Western countries will have to apologize to countries for looting their cultural property in the past century. That would strengthen the argument. It wouldn't undermine the argument. Museums established in economically deprived, archaeologically resource countries can display the antiques discovered there. Yes, that is to give a boost to tourism. Affluent, archaeologically rich source countries can afford to carry out their own excavations. That's correct. Number one, you see, would undermine the central idea of the passage. And what is that? UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. If the UNESCO were to do that, then probably you will not have the problem of cultural transfer of cultural property or the execution of the patrimony laws. Then you would not face the problem of paying the other countries, or you would not have the problem of inviting, you see, other countries to work in your source country. Now let's come to the next question. Which one of the following statements best expresses the paradox of patrimony laws? Now, paradox is something which is self-contradictory. Now, which one of the statements does that? They were intended to protect cultural property, but instead resulted in withholding of national treasure from museums. Now, that isn't self-contradictory. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced new archaeological discoveries. Now, that is a paradox. You want to protect the cultural property, but then what happens is, you see, your new archaeological discoveries are restricted, they are reduced. So number two is the correct option. They were intended to protect cultural property, but instead resulted in the neglect of historical sites. Now that isn't a paradox that's mentioned there. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced business for auctioneers like Sotheby's. Now that is not a paradox, right? Number two is the correct option. Let's look at the next question. It can be inferred from the passage that archaeological sites are considered important by some source countries because, number one, they are subject to strict patrimony laws. No, that wouldn't be bring out the importance, you see. Are a symbol of Western imperialism? No. Give a boost to the tourism sector? Yes, they are important for that. For giving a boost to the tourism sector, generate funds for future. No, that's not the correct answer. Number three is the correct option. Now, let's come to the next passage here. He's talking about the nutmeg curse by Ghosh. And this is about the climate crisis. In the first paragraph, he says, when prevailing understanding of when the climate crisis started. And when did it start? With the widespread use of coal at the beginning of the industrial age in the 18th century and worsened with the mass adoption of oil and natural gas in the 20th. Now, in the second paragraph, he's talking about the exploitation of natural resources. That is the second paragraph. He takes the history of 3 centuries back. He's doing that in that book, The Nutmeg's Curse, to the start of the European colonialism in the 15th century. And then he talks about the Dutch invaders. And then he talks about, you see, how they started depopulating people, you see, in their own islands, in their own countries, and how they were, you see, possibly encouraging the agriculture or the growth, what you call the cultivation of nutmeg. So what they were doing is, in order to give a boost to their own cultivations, they didn't even bother if they were doing genocide or decimating the local population. All that they were interested in, what you call, just exploiting, you see, the natural resources. And in this paragraph, he talks about two things: that the European colonists not only decimated the indigenous population, but then you see there was an exploitation to the level that the human beings' relationship with the earth was snapped, right? They were actually not invading humans. They were actually, you see, exploiting the earth. That's what they were doing. And then in the third paragraph, again, he carries on with the point of exploitation only here also. And then he points out how natural disasters and natural things like storms and floods and droughts and wildfires, they have become common due to climate change. Climate change, you see, has brought about these things. You have deforestation, and you have got so many things, right, that goes about the whole thing. And the main point he wants to point out is the relationship between humans and the world around them, so that he can question the prevalent way of looking at earth as an inert object to be exploited to the maximum. He's trying to tell you that whatever they were doing, they were exploiting, you see, everything, the relationship between human beings and the earth, and in particular the earth. That's what they were doing. And then you have the next point. This is something not new. The imperialist, the colonialist would do that. So the basic thing that he talks about here is the vested interest of the rulers, the vested interest of the imperialist and other countries. You see, their interest in oil drilling in other things. And you see, what has brought about, you see, is a change in the climate. They have sabotaged everything. So this is the passage about climate change and other things. In the last paragraph also, he's talking about the Latin American way of looking at earth as Pachamama, that is earth mother. And the point is, it's not what you call the earth. The point is how, to what extent the earth has been exploited, and the relationship between human beings and earth has been snapped. So that is all about in this passage. Now let's look at the questions. The question says, which one of the following best explains the primary purpose of the discussion of the colonization of Banda Islands in the Nutmeg's Curse? He has talked about the Banda Islands, and I told you at the beginning to what extent the exploitation was going on, the decimation of population. They didn't bother whether people died. They were only interested in all that cultivation. So, number one, to illustrate the role played by the cultivation of certain crops in the plantation mode in contributing to climate change. No, that's not the thing. To illustrate how systematic violence against the colonized constituted the cornerstone of colonialism. He's not talking about colonialism. He's actually talking about climate change here. To illustrate the first instance in history when the processes responsible for climate change were initiated. No. When it comes to the discussion of Banda Islands, number 4 is the correct option, to illustrate how colonialism represented and perpetuated the mindset that has led to climate change. Now let's look at the next question. On the basis of information in the passage, which one of the following is not a reason for the failure of policies seeking to address climate change? Which one of the following is not? And the answer is the decentralized characteristic of renewable energy sources like solar power. Now, that is not a reason for the failure of policies seeking to address climate change. The marginalized status of non-European ways of looking at nature and the environment, that is the reason. The global dominance of economies and international policies built around it, the greed of organizations benefiting from non-renewable energy resources. Yes, but number four, you see, is not a reason. The other three could be the reason. The next question, all of the following can be inferred from the reviewer's discussion of the nutmeg's curse, except what? You can infer the history of climate change is deeply intertwined with the history of colonialism. You can infer that because he has pointed that out. Number two, environmental preservation policy makers can learn a lot from the non-European and or pre-colonial societies. They can do that. Academic discourses have always served the function of raising awareness in environmental preservation. You can't infer this, you see, because nothing of this kind has been made in the passage. So number three is the correct option. The contemporary dominant perception of nature and the environment was put in place by the processes of colonialism. That could be okay. But number three is the correct option. Now let's look at the next question. Which one of the following, if true, would make the reviewer's choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? Inappropriate. Okay. Number one, non-European societies have perceived the earth as a non-living source of all resources. Number two, Ghosh's book has a different title, The Nutmeg's Revenge. No, modern Western science discovers new evidence for Earth being an inanimate object. No, there is a direct cause-effect relationship between human activities and global climate change. The question, it says that how would the pronoun who would be inappropriate? Number one is the correct answer. Non-European societies have perceived the earth as a non-living source of all resources. They have done that. Now let's come to the next passage. And here is talking about romanticism and romantic aesthetics. Now, what do you mean by romanticism and romantic aesthetics? I'll just give you in brief an idea about this. You see, particularly the end of the 17th century and the middle of the 18th century, somewhere in the middle of the 18th century, and after that, you had the romantic movement in England and Germany and other places. And I'll give you in short, there was a lot of German influence, you see, on English romanticism. The romanticism involved, you see, literature, a call back to nature, you see, once more going back into the lap of nature, trees and plants and skies and water and pools and hills and mountains, the sun and the moon and everything, you see, was to be looked for in nature, you see. You want to rest, you have to rest in nature, you look for God in nature, right? That is romantic. The point that is trying to make in the first paragraph is you have scholars like Arthur Lovejoy and Northrop Frye. They are all big critics, big scholars, but then what they point out is they say it's not easy to define the word romantic, or it's not easy to define romanticism, because they say it is what you call a term. You see, romanticism is the scandal of literary history and criticism, right? They feel that the romantic movement, romanticism, you see, it is something like a scandal on literary history and literary movement. That is what they point out. Now, the next point they are trying to make out is, and why do they do that? The obvious point is, you see, in romanticism, there was no adherence to rules. You see, in writing poems, in writing anything, there was no adherence to rules. It was to be written in the language of the common man. They were not bound by any kind of rules or any kind of discipline or any kind of order, you see. It was only, you see, emotions recollected in tranquility, you see, spontaneous overflow of emotions, you see. They just came up with whatever they had in their mind. And that is why critics like Fry and Lovejoy, they point out it's very difficult to define romanticism, and it's more or less a scandal. The next thing in the next paragraph, you see, the point is the more specific task of characterizing romantic aesthetic adds to these difficulties an air of paradox. So, if you're talking about aesthetics, aesthetics is basically about beauty and art, or the branch of philosophy that studies these topics. Now, what did the romantics do? The romantics, you see, they committed themselves to art and beauty, right? And they felt that natural beauty, natural art should shape everything you see in our lives. Now, this might sound a little vague, no doubt. That is what these two critics were pointing out, that our lives should be painted by art and beauty, and you look for art and beauty in nature. And that has been mentioned in the passage. Central ingredient, not only in a philosophical or artistic life, but also in the lives of ordinary men and women. The point is, how do you define romantic aesthetics? Because you don't get a clear definition. All that you find is in the poems. You see, you have poems and aphorisms and everything, and they are suggestions with no conclusions. They're just talking about romantic aesthetics. There's no one, two, three, four, five. You can't have such a classification there. That's what the two critics are trying to tell us. But the point he makes in the next paragraph is it's neither impossible nor undesirable. You can characterize, you see, romanticism in spite of all the doubts Lovejoy has or Fry has. So we don't have to define, you see, romanticism negatively, right? But there's one thing, that there was a romantic movement, and we have got to discover it. We have got to understand that movement. And of course, in the last paragraph, as I told you, he talks about the origin of what you call romanticism, and I pointed to you out that all that early romanticism you had was under the German influence, right? And the German romantics, and it was after the aftermath of philosopher Kant's philosophy, the philosopher Kant. Now let's come to the questions. Which one of the following statements is not supported by the passage? Let us see. Many romantics rejected the idea of aesthetics as a domain separate from other aspects of life. Yes, characterizing romantic aesthetics is both possible and desirable despite the challenges involved. He has stated that in the what you call in the third paragraph. We can do that. Recent studies on romanticism seek to refute the differences between national romanticisms. No, this is not supported. We are not talking about national romanticisms. You see, because we are talking about the influence of German romanticism on what you call English romanticism, and possibly, you see, he doesn't talk about national romanticism. He is only talking about the influence of German on English romanticism. So number 3 is the correct option. Romantic aesthetics are primarily expressed through fragments, aphorisms, and poems. That's correct. The second paragraph, the last line. The next question, according to the romantics, aesthetics. What is aesthetics? According to the romantics, number 1 is widely considered to be irrelevant to human existence. That is false. They consider that important. Is primarily the concern of philosophers and artists rather than of ordinary people. No, they rather involve the ordinary people. Permeates all aspects of human life, philosophical and mundane. That is what it is stated there in the lives of ordinary men and women, right? So number 3 is the correct option. Now, what does that all mean? I mean, it all means is that romanticism involves, you see, the use of language of the common man. You see, there was a poet called Wordsworth, and he said that a poet is a man speaking to men. There should be nothing difficult for people to understand. Poetry should be written in the language of the common man. That is what they said. Everybody should be able to understand poetry, you see, without the help of a teacher or without the help of a guide, you see. And that is what he says here, that it permeates all aspects of human life, philosophical and mundane, you see, the material life should be confined to a specific domain separate from the practical and theoretical aspects of life. Nothing of that kind. Let's look at the next question. According to the passage, recent studies on romanticism avoid a single definition, a specific time, or a specific place because they, why? Prefer to highlight the paradox of romantic aesthetics as a concept? No. Understand that the variety of romanticism renders the general analysis impossible. No, that cannot be. They prefer to focus on the fundamental concerns of the romantics. That is the reason. That is the reason. Number three is the correct option. The recent studies you see, they avoid a single definition or a single place or specific time because they want to point out what is the germ, the kernel of romanticism. Seek to discredit Lovejoy's skepticism regarding, no, that's not the point here. And then the next question, the main difficulty in studying romanticism is elusive and suggestive nature of romantic aesthetics. It's not that elusive and that suggestive. It's only, you see, by the critics' word that you say it is elusive and suggestive. Lack of clear conceptual contours of the domain. Yes, that is the answer. The difficulty in studying romanticism is lack of clear conceptual contours of the domain, you see. In classicism, in neoclassicism, in ancient literature, you had rules, right? You had a certain discipline. But in romanticism, you don't have any clear concern. You see clear clarity of the concept there. Now, what do you mean by clarity of concept? The point is because you may not have studied literature, you may not have an idea, but then you have a variety of poets and writers in the romantic age, and they are not writing, you see, by one rule or one system. They are all romantics, but they all differ in the treatment of their themes, of their subjects, right? You wouldn't expect such a difference if it were a neoclassicism or a classical classicism. You wouldn't expect that there. So number two is the correct option. Absence of written accounts by romantic poets and artists. No controversial and scandalous. No, that's not the answer. The answer is number two. Now let's come to the next passage. This is a passage basically about Steven Pinker's new book, Rationality. And he's talking about the importance of rationality. And he gives you a dose of measured optimism. And then he says, well, rationality is very important and it can be achieved. And he says it's no small achievement to make formal logic, game theory, statistics, and Bayesian reasoning delightful topics full of charm and relevance. He says that through rationality, you can make anything very charming and very relevant. So, in the next paragraph, what it says here is it is also plausible to believe that a wider application of the rational tools he analyzes would improve the world in important ways. That is, rationality, reasoning would go a far way in improving the world, right? And then he talks about that, he talks about statistics and scientific uncertainty. And the point he makes here in this paragraph is, I mean, if the media were not to give a very wide coverage, you see, of shocking events or shark attacks or vaccine reactions, then possibly people would not overreact. People overreact to certain things only because of wide media coverage. So he uses rationality there also. He gives the reason for the people's overreactions. So what he says here is if there were less media coverage about things, possibly people would rationally think and do better. But the thing is, he's trying to drive it is that media could be misdirected, misguided, and possibly land people into confusions. She says in the next paragraph, it's a reasonable critique, and Pinker is not the first to make it, but analyzing the political economy of journalism, its funding structures, ownership concentration, and increased reliance on social media shares would have given a fuller picture of why so much coverage is so misguided and what we might do about it. His emphasis In the next paragraph, his emphasis is on sequential reasoning, looking for proof, looking for argument everywhere. That is what Pinker wants to point out. And he tells you, well, the tools of rationality, you see, the mastery of the tools of rationality would possibly go a long way in making medical, legal, financial decisions, right? And would help people to think for themselves and decide for themselves. Now, that seems to be an overemphasis, an exaggerated emphasis on rationality. In the last paragraph, which is a long paragraph, he tells, last two paragraphs, the writer is talking about one thing, and that is inspiration. He says, how is inspiration guided by rationality? The ancient discoveries you find there, the discoveries in Max, or you had that Euclid or one who said Eureka, Eureka, he suddenly discovered something. Or you have what you call Mozart symphonies, or you have what you call Plato, Socrates, and other things. Some of them have dreamt something, some of them were inspired and they don't have a reason, but they came out with some kind of invention, they came out with some kind of discoveries. They were not based on rationality. There is some kind of morality and ethicality involved, which is not covered by Pinker, you see, in his theory of rationality. So the point is, if you go back to some of the discoveries in the ancient times, you talk about Plato's dialogues or Socrates' dialogues, all that rationality that's involved there, it is something which is sudden, you see, which comes out, which doesn't appear to be premeditated, you see. So everything cannot be attributed to what you call sequential reasoning and rationality. You can't do that. Now let's come to what you call the questions here. The author endorses Pinker's views on the importance of logical reasoning, as it helps people to gain expertise in statistics. No, it's not talking about any particular discipline. Focuses public attention on real issues like development rather than sensational. No, that's not the reason. Equips people with the ability to tackle challenging practical problems. Possibly. That's what he said. Medical, legal, financial problems can be tackled by sequential logical reasoning. Provides a moral compass for resolving important ethical dilemmas. No, that has not been mentioned. So, number three is the correct option. The author refers to the ancient Greek philosophers. Why? We just talked about the ancient Greek philosophers. And the answer is reveal gaps in Pinker's discussion of the importance of ethical considerations in rational behavior. I told you that. The moral and ethical point has not been brought in. So number three is the correct option. Number one says show how dreams and visions have for centuries influenced subconscious behavior and path-breaking inventions. That could be a point there, but it's not. It's now this sentence is exaggerated. For centuries influenced subconscious behavior and path-breaking inventions. No, all inventions are not due to all the dreams and visions you see. Highlight the influence of their thinking on the development of Pinker's arguments. No, indicate the various similarities between their thinking and Pinker's conclusions. No, there's no similarity as such that way. So the correct option is number three. The next question. According to the author, for Pinker as well as the ancient Greek philosophers, rational thinking involves all of the following except the primacy of conscious sequential reasoning as the basis for seminal human achievements. Right? It cannot be the primacy of conscious sequential reasoning only, you see. So number two should be the correct answer. Number one, an awareness of underlying assumptions in an argument and gaps in one's own knowledge. No. Arriving at independent conclusions irrespective of who is presenting the argument. That is beside the point. You see, we haven't talked about that. The belief that the ability to reason logically encompasses an ethical and moral dimension. No, that is what we are looking for in the last paragraph. So number two is the correct option. The author mentions Kekule's discovery of the structure of benzene and Mozart's symphonies to illustrate the point. What point is he illustrating? Great innovations across the various fields can stem from flashes of intuition and are not always propelled by logical thinking. I pointed that out to you. Whether your Mozart symphonies or this thing, sometimes you see they are a point of inspiration or intuition. It's not logical reasoning, you see. So number three is the correct option. The other options are not correct. Now let's come to the next question. And here you have, there's a sentence that is missing in the paragraph below. Look at the paragraph and decide where option 1, 2, 3, or 4, the following sentence would best fit. And in doing a question of this kind, you have to keep into mind the main thought in the paragraph, as well as contextually, you see, the sentence should fit there contextually. He says an argument can be defined as a complex symbolic structure where some parts known as the premises offer support to another part. Okay, the conclusion. Alternatively, an argument can be viewed as a complex speech act consisting of one or more acts of premising, which assert propositions in favor of the conclusion. An act of concluding and a stated or implicit marker, hence, therefore, that indicates the conclusion follows from the premises. Okay, now here we have stopped here. Now, number one, we can't put it there because if you say that for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities abstracted from their context of use in the actual human activities, then you say an argument can be defined. It doesn't go well because he first defines an argument. So it cannot come in number one. Okay. What about number two? It cannot stand there because he has talked about how you end something, an argument with hence or therefore. So number two, you see, cannot be the answer. Now let us look after that. The relation of support between premises and conclusion can be cashed out in different ways. The premises may guarantee the truth of the conclusion or make its truth more probable. The premises may imply the conclusion. The premises may make the conclusion more acceptable or assertable. But depending on one's explanatory goals, there is also much more to be gained from considering arguments as they in fact occur in human communicative practices. Okay, so now we explained that in two, the premises may imply the conclusion, the premises may make the conclusion more acceptable or acceptable. Then you say for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities, abstracted from their context of use in actual human activities. So I think option three is the correct answer. Now let's come to the next paragraph. And look at this sentence here. Beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force, armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. Now, you can't start the sentence with beyond undermining. So, number one, you see, cannot be the correct option. Okay. Linkages between illicit arms, organized crime, and armed conflict can reinforce one another while also escalating and prolonging violence and eroding governance. Okay. That's correct. Now, you can't say beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force. Nothing has been said there about the use of force in the previous sentence. The next one says financial gains from crime can lengthen or intensify armed conflicts by creating revenue streams for non-state armed groups like NSAGs. Now here you can put this sentence here: beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force, armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. Option three. And in this context, then he talks about the conflict. The answer is four, of course. Now let's come to the next exercise. Where you have five jumbled sentences: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got to arrange them sequentially, the four of them, and one is the odd one out. He says Boas Sr., who lived through the 2004 tsunami, the Japanese occupation, and diseases brought by British settlers, was the last native of the island chain who was fluent in Po. Okay. The indigenous population has been steadily collapsing since the chain was colonized by British settlers in 1858 and used for most of the following 100 years as a colonial penal colony. Okay, Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese languages. That's number three. The last speaker about the language, and number five about the language. So you can see for yourself 1, 3, 4, 5. This is all about the Bo language. Only number two is the odd one out, which talks about the indigenous settlers and being colonized by the British settlers, which doesn't suit into the arrangement here. Now, let's look at the next question here. Although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, some companies are moving away from choosing prospective hires based on technical abilities alone. Okay. Companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for the singularly perfect candidate altogether. Now, some job descriptions are frequently asking for candidates to demonstrate soft skills. Okay, that's not to say that practical know-how is no longer required. They require expertise. The move towards the prioritizing soft skills is a natural response. Okay, so now you can see for yourself that 1, 3, 4, 5, it talks about the soft skills and the technical skills that are required, and number two somehow doesn't fit into it. The definition of the ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for the singularly perfect candidate together, right? It doesn't get into it. So number two is the odd one out. Now let's come to the next, what you call, exercise. And here you have, you see four sentences. They are jumbled. You have got to do proper sequencing. You have Veena Sahajwala, a material scientist at the University of New South Wales, believes there is a new way of solving this problem. Now we don't know what is the problem. So number one cannot be the correct option. Number two cannot be the first sentence because it starts with her vision. We don't know whose vision. Number four cannot be the correct first sentence because she says she plans. We don't know who plans. So in the available options, number three is the correct option. Number three should be the first sentence. After that, e-waste contains huge quantities of valuable metals, ceramics, and plastics that could be salvaged and recycled, although currently not enough of it is. Now, after three, you have number one. You have Veena Sahajwala, you see, trying to solve this problem, number one. And after number one, what she plans to do, that is number four. And then her vision is for automated drones and robots to pick out components. So 3, 1, 4, 2. The next cluster of sentences you have here is, centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading. Centuries later, that is, he must have talked about something before. Centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading. So number one cannot be the correct option. One of the immediate and recognizable impacts of the printing press was how people learned. In the scribal culture, it primarily involved listening, so memorization was paramount. Okay, that is a general statement, and I think that can come as the first sentence. The transformation of learners from listeners to readers was a complex social and cultural phenomenon. Now, you cannot put what you call three as the first statement because three involves that something has already been talked about, you see, from learners and listeners and readers. The printing press shifted the learning process. So after two, you must have after number four. In number two, he talks about the printing press. In number four, he talks about what the printing press did. And number three, you see, it talks about the transformation. So it should be 2, 4, 3, and then one. You can see for yourself now, from the printing press to all education affecting technologies such as film, radio, television, etc. The answer is 2, 4, 3, 1. Now let's come to the next question. And here you have a question, a passage, and you have to look for the best summary here. He says, gradually life for the island's bird is improving. Antarctic prions and white-headed petrels, which also nest in burrows, has managed to cling on some sites while pests were on the island. Their numbers are now increasing. It is fantastic and also exciting, Shaw says. As birds return to breed, they also poo. Poo means to defecate, right? This DEFECATE. This add nutrients to the soil, that is fertilizes the soil, which in turn helps the plants to grow back stronger. Tall plants then help burrowing birds hide from predatory squirrels. It is this wonderful feedback loop. Shaw says today the pretty paddock that Houghton first experienced has been transformed. The tussock is over your head and you're dodging all those penguin tunnels, she says. The orchards and tiny herb that had been protected by fencing have started turning up all over the place. Now, what could be the correct summary or a good summary? In the absence of the pests, life on the island is now protected and there has been a revival of the variety of birds and plants. You can see that for yourself. There is a huge positive transformation of the ecosystem of the island. Now, that is an exaggeration, a huge positive transformation of the ecosystem. Number two cannot be the correct option. There is an increase in number of predatory birds and plants on the island despite the presence of pests, which is the positive development. Point is, there are not many pests there. So number three cannot be the correct answer. Flowering plants, herbs, and birds are now being protected on this wonderful Antarctic. No, yeah, that is, I mean, simplifying the thing. Number one is the correct option. In the absence of pests, life on the island is now protected, and there has been a revival of variety of birds and plants. That is the correct option. Let's come to this question. The weight of society's expectation is hardly a new phenomenon, but it has become particularly draining over recent decades, perhaps because expectations themselves are so multifarious and contradictory. The perfectionism of the 1950s was rooted in the norms of mass culture and captured in famous advertising images of the ideal white American family that now seem self satirizing. In that era, perfectionism meant seamlessly conforming to values. Now, that is the key sentence here. You see, in that particular era, you see what was perfectionism? Perfectionism means conformity, conforming to values, behavior, appearance, chiseled confidence for men, demure graciousness for women. That was perfectionism. You conform to certain values, behavior, appearance, right? The perfectionist was under pressure to look like everyone else, only more so. The perfectionist of by contrast, feel an obligation to stand out through their idiosyncratic style and wit if they are to gain a foothold in the attention economy. Now, what is the difference between the two? One, you see, is the difference of the differences of conformity and non-conformity of yesterday and today, of the past and the present. The perfectionist of today, by contrast, yes, by comparison, they want to they don't want to conform to all those values, behavior, appearance, and chiseled confidence. No, their own idiosyncratic style and wit, you see, if they want to gain a foothold in the economy. You see, in the attention, in the advertisement world or the attention economy. So now let's come to the options here. The summaries. Though long standing, the pressure or to appear perfect and thereby attract attention has evolved over time from one of conformism to one of non-conformism. And that is the best summary available here. Number one. Number two, the desire to attract attention is so deep rooted in individual consciousness that people are willing to go to any lengths to achieve it. No, that is not the point. He's talking about perfectionism. The pressure to appear perfect has been the cause of tension and conflict because the idea itself has been a state of flux and hard to define. Though he hasn't said anything of that kind there. The image of perfectionism is reflected in and perpetuated by the media, and people do their best to adhere to these ideals. No, it's not nothing about media and other things. First one is the best summary.